Hi there, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be doing an analysis and valuation of Nexon Co. If you play any video games such as MapleStory or Mabinogi, you probably know who Nexon are. So, without further ado, let's go right ahead. Now, Nexon makes video games. This is what they do. And they generally make these titles that you can play over and over. They're generally online, you're playing with other players, and here's the breakdown of just their key titles by region. They mainly operate in Korea, China, and Japan, although if you're in North America and Europe, or the rest of the world, there will be titles of theirs that maybe you play right now, or that you are potentially going to play if they ever release outside of those geographies. So, yeah, here's their breakdown where Korea's 52% of the market, China's 35% of the market, and then the rest of the world takes a smaller piece of the pie. They're mainly a PC games producer, but they have a lot of mobile games as well, and that is an ever-growing piece of the pie too. Mobile is becoming a larger segment of both their users and their revenue, and I think that's probably a trend that's going to keep going and keep growing. So they focus very much on this whole immersive and online games. You can see here there's different categories of games based on whether they're offline and immersive or light. And the thing is, their games are pretty much here: MapleStory, Dungeon Fighter Online, Kart Rider Drift, and this thing which I cannot read, pardon me. But yeah, essentially they want games that are almost always online at least, and very immersive. That is what they focus on. And the thing is, these games you can monetize forever, right? You can monetize as long as there's a player base. Other games, like games that are very immersive but offline, for example, Alien Isolation, they will have a peak in sales around when they come out, maybe around other times where maybe the game isn't popular conversation, but essentially the sales will plateau over time. And we'll see a little more of this, but they want games that they can keep selling for perpetuity, essentially, theoretically, that is. And even games like MapleStory that came out in the early 2000s, these are still making money. They may be declining a little bit, but they've been making money since the early 2000s with some expansions, with some care and love put into the game, but still, it's very different. And here's what I was talking about. The whole thing is they want virtual worlds that they can expand over time. This is essentially how they can grow over time or make money over time, rather than a traditional game which has a peak around launch and then just sort of plateaus over time. There are exceptions to this for both virtual worlds and traditional games. However, this is the general thing you can see, right? And the whole thing is that they have a solid foundation of games. They have MapleStory, they have Kart Rider, they have Dungeon Fighter Online, etc. And these are games that already give them pretty steady revenue. It's not to say that if they just rest on their laurels, the revenue won't decrease, or if they never maintain those games, the revenue won't decrease. But the whole thing is they have some reliable revenue. Now, with these upcoming IPs that they're going to have, they can create additional revenue, assuming everything goes correctly, right? And the whole thing is that they have pretty strong live operations. Dungeon Fighter, MapleStory, FIFA Online 4, they've been giving them revenue for many, many years, and essentially this pie is growing. This pie has been growing since 2020 especially, which makes sense. And here's some historical financials. Here's the revenue broken down by region. You can see that Korea is by far their most profitable region, followed by China, and then the rest of the world. But yeah, essentially, they focus on a Korean and Chinese audience, which does have different preferences than a Western audience, which is important to note because I know Nexon doesn't have maybe the greatest reputation in the West. This is true. Maybe they don't have the greatest reputation in the East either. I don't actually know. But it's important to know that they're catering their games to that audience, and that is why some of their practices may be a little different or confusing when we play their games in the West, right? And the revenue by platform, you can see that it's always been PC in the dominant revenue source, but that mobile is ever growing. Now it's 31%. It used to be basically nothing. So this is good to see. And here's some financial statements that they provide. These are in yen. We're going to later analyze this stuff in dollars. So note that the revenue here is very interesting because they have the revenue here, but then they have non-operating income, which is actually a huge number. So We'll talk about this later, but the revenue here is essentially going up and down. It has some highs, some lows, but it's pretty consistent at least. It's not necessarily decreasing. It just hasn't increased much since 2017 as opposed to 2022. Their gross profit is basically the same story, a similar story. Maybe they've become a little more operationally efficient, but that's good. They usually have an operating loss, but then they have a bunch of non-operating income. I'm pretty sure this is from their subscription services and stuff. And then they would have pretty high net income. So generally, they are a profitable company, especially after 2019 and onwards. They've been a profitable company. The whole thing is, can they use these profits efficiently in order to grow their revenues and profits further, right? And using these numbers, we can do a discounted free cash flow model. Now, what am I doing here? I'm essentially saying that they're going to have a 5% revenue growth over time, right? So from 2023 to 2026, the revenue is going to grow 5%, which is generous. It's optimistic. May not happen. It may happen. I'm just giving this calculation just to see what happens. But yeah, their free cash flow is also going to grow by 5% every year, essentially. And what happens if I have a required rate of return of 11%, which is 1% per year more than the market? We're going to say the market gives us 10% per year, and a perpetual growth rate of 2%, then this means that Nexon is going to grow 2% for perpetuity after this period of 4 years is done. Then the fair value of Nexon divided by the shares out is $13.96. Note, this is converted to dollars. This was in yens, but we're using dollars here because I'm analyzing the ADR, which is essentially the stock that is listed on the US stock exchange. Now, we have to adjust for debt. And something very important here is that Nexon actually has a positive cash position. They have way more cash than debt. In fact, they have a pretty much a negligible amount of debt, and they have a gigantic pile of cash. So let's add the cash to the total value here. You see a negative number because their debt is negative. If they have their net debt is negative if they have so much more cash. So that would add to the value, and then their value would actually be $18.66 with net debt or net cash in this case included. Now let's compare it to where Nexon is right now. So Nexon is a little bit over this value, not by significantly much, but if you see, they actually have had periods before in between 2021 and 2022, and even fairly recently, where they were trading at below this value of $18.66. So just because they've risen here, this has also coincided with a general rise in the Japanese stock market. Just because they've risen recently doesn't mean that they won't be back down there again. It just depends. And I know they have had a few scandals, a few lawsuits recently that could also bring the value down. And just because some of their monetization in games can be a little predatory, so clearly if they don't change that, that can be an issue. They can lose a lawsuit, for example. But this means that we can see the share price go lower. We could see it happen soon. It just depends. But this is what I'm saying, is that opportunities may come, but not without risk when it comes to Nexon. It's funny because I analyzed a pharma company fairly recently, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and it's very similar how game companies work compared to pharma companies. Pharma companies have many products coming in the pipeline, and you're hoping that a lot of these products stick or are successful or get approved, and that their current products hopefully stick around as well, or if they're at risk with competitors, well, that this is only one product that declines and the other products can stay growing. Game companies are very much the same. Game companies have all these products that are coming, being developed, and you're hoping that they succeed. There's a lot of IPs that don't succeed, but you're hoping that what's coming in the pipeline is going to be successful, and that what's already in the pipeline isn't declining too badly, and then with that healthy mix, you'll be able to have an overall very profitable company. So Nexon does have solid and very sticky IPs as well as many in the pipeline, but the success of future games is very unpredictable. Nexon has launched IPs before, but that had poor launches and didn't really stick. In fact, one of their most profitable IPs is MapleStory. They launched MapleStory 2. That was a thing I remember in about, 2015, 2016? And MapleStory 2 has already shut down, as opposed to the original MapleStory, which is already very profitable since the early 2000s. Currency risk is also ever present for Nexon, especially if the dollar does strengthen. They have a lot of money in Japanese yen, in Korean won, in Chinese yuan. So that means that if those currencies lose value relative to the dollar, if you're investing on Nexon from a dollar standpoint, well, you may see a little bit of a hit in the value of Nexon. Net debt is nice, right? They have no debt, a huge cash pile, so and they do repurchase a lot of shares, and they have a small dividend. It's more of a token dividend than anything else. It's not really a significant dividend, but it is nice to have this situation. Now, if the cash pile is too big, you may be just wondering, what are they doing then? This is common with Japanese companies to not have much debt, if at all, and to have a large cash pile, but maybe you have to ask sometimes if the cash pile just grows and grows and grows, if management is being efficient. Because if you have this giant cash pile that's going nowhere, well, that can be a sign of inefficiency. And lastly, revenue growth can be a little spotty, and execution is going to matter a lot. The whole thing is their revenue hasn't been growing at the most consistent rate, but we would want to see their revenue growing with some new IPs, and execution will matter a lot. The stickiness of these IPs will matter a lot. There is uncertainty here, and it's not like Nexon has a massive moat. They're competing with all the other video games out there, and they're competing still with stuff like Netflix or any other thing you can do with your free time, because that's when you play video games, in your free time. So they don't have a moat. They do have a loyal player base for some of their games, but this won't last forever, and they need new games that will stick. So there are opportunities here at the right valuation, but Nexon doesn't come with that risk. So another thing I want to say here is just keep up with your holdings. With Nexon, if you invest in Nexon, you'll want to see how their games are doing over time, over quarters, over years, and how their new IPs are sticking or not. Same as with the pharma company analogy, you want to see if the products in the pipeline are doing good, if they're being threatened by competitors, and whatnot. Remember to keep up with your holdings. You don't have to do it all the time. Every piece of news won't matter, but keep up with the quarterly reports, keep up with the yearly reports especially, and just see what happens. Now, I hope this analysis was useful, and if you have any questions about it, I hope you comment down below and you tell me your thoughts. And if there's any other stock you want me to analyze, well, comment down below as well, and if it's interesting, I'll make a video of it. So if you like this, please like and subscribe. There will be many more videos like these. And with that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day.